I remember asking myself at the time, how intentional had I been in how I treated the relationships that had been established to that point? How intentional had I been about maintaining those relationships, cultivating those relationships? When people saw my name come up on their phone screen, as far as me placing a call to express where we were, what changes had occurred, and what our most immediate needs were, what would most resonate in their minds when they thought about me, when they thought about our exchanges, when they thought about our conversations leading up to that point? Those were my thoughts. And I remember, again, we were getting established, reacclimating to life outside of the home that we had known. And I remember the graciousness of a dear couple friend of ours. So they were actually newly married as well, more new than we were. And they had not yet established their family, like their children. They have a beautiful family at this point, but they had not yet had their children yet. And I remember how gracious they were in receiving us into their home. Again, it was myself, my husband, and our toddler. Um, I like to think that she was the most remarkable toddler at the time, and I believe she was, but she's still a toddler who's active and excited about life and excited about exploring and just being open about what things would unfold for her as she went about her day. So I thought about that in a couple's home, in a home of a couple who did not yet have children, and how they would receive our young family. I remember my husband and I having conversations, and it's kind of one of those things where it was like these very unspoken conversations, these very internal conversations that we'd had with ourselves, this knowing that we're here, we're going to make the best of our situation, and we're going to continue to build forward. So we were very much in agreement that we were going to keep the home a certain way, of course, keep our space that we were sharing. We were literally sharing a one room space in their home, just because we were going to be there very temporarily as we thought about what we needed to do, because it was approaching the holidays at that point, and we understood that they were going to have their own family present for the holidays. So it was going to be a very short term stay. So as we thought through what our next steps were and just thought about, hey, we're in this room, we're together, we're grateful for what we have, we're grateful for the family that was willing to and able to receive us. We're going to do the things we would typically do. We're going to speak to one another in a manner that is respectful. Certainly, there were lots of feelings and experiences to process through, thoughts to process through, but that we weren't going to, as a couple, allow that to be the thing that shifted how we spoke to one another, how we treated one another, how we regarded one another. And that was like really at the forefront of my mind. And I know that was something that was the forefront of my husband's mind, because he said it in different ways in so many words, but also how he demonstrated himself as a husband and father and as a man. We decided, okay, we like to cook together, so this is what is going to be our contribution to this family who has so graciously received us. So we made sure we cooked meals for the entire household. We made sure we kept our space clean, kept areas that we occupied clean. Any way that we can contribute in the home to make things easier for them is what we decided we wanted to do. Um, so we decided that that's what we were going to focus on during our short-term stay, and that's what we did. And I remember the words that this couple shared once we left, and they spoke to the fact that even in that most, at that point, difficult time in our marriage, they watched how we moved, they watched how we interacted with one another, they watched how we still were able to laugh with one another. We still took time to express words of care, still took time to be affectionate, still very intentional about how we cared for our daughter. So they spoke to us about that while we were in the home. I would say I remember it more so during the time right before I transitioned from the home, but also from their home. But also, as we reflected on conversations later with this dear couple friend of ours, that was something that resonated. That's something that came up most often. How we spoke to one another, how intentional we were about how we moved and responded to one another was really pivotal in how they viewed us during that time. So, again, going back to community and how important community is and how important it is to really reflect on those relationships that you've built. We literally, our next move was into a home of a person we had never formally met before. So we have another dear couple friend of ours that we're still very close with today, who was friends with an individual who really had a home that she allowed to serve as a sanctuary. That's the best way I can describe it. It was a sanctuary for people. I couldn't tell you how many individuals she had let into her home up to that point. I couldn't tell you how many people she received thereafter, as far as once we had transitioned into the next part of our story. But I remember this dear couple friend of ours getting us connected with this beautiful angel of a person, who we're very close with today still. And I remember sitting down with her really right before the holidays, before we were going to formally make our next move from the house that we were staying in, the home we were staying in, and before we formally settled in to the next place. I said the next place, and these are still places that we're being received, and this is not our home just yet. These are places and people and families that were just gracious enough to receive us, a part of our community, or those who have been we've been connected to through our community. So we sat down with this individual who later became very dear to us as a friend, still is. And I remember sitting on her very large, like sectional sofa, and I remember at that point I felt really small. And I'm not a person who feels small in spaces. I'm petite as an individual, but feeling small is not necessarily about your stature. I typically walk into spaces, shoulders back, head up high, head held high, chest out, confidently. I have a very distinctive walk, as people say, distinctive way that I enter spaces. But I remember at that particular time, I felt very small, not in comparison to her stature, not because of anything that she did, not because of anything with regard to the space I was in. It was just this very, very interesting position of vulnerability. Like we had been walking through this experience, still building forward, but it was a time where I was just able to sit and formally take a moment to reflect and breathe out what had happened up to that point, and just really being honest about what we needed at the time, what we needed at the time, what would be most reasonable as far as what we could contribute, um, what we had the capacity for, honestly, so that we could actually get formally established as a family back into our own home. So we had to have that conversation with this person that we had not met prior to this meeting, had not spoken to prior to sitting down with her on her sectional, and just had to be very open and honest and vulnerable about our situation and where we were at the time. And then prayerfully, hopefully, she would receive that and be able to receive us. So she did. She was able to do that. We moved into her home. She had a room that my husband and I were able to be in. There was a room connected to that space that our daughter was able to have. And we were just so grateful. It was a kind of grateful where you felt like, man, we are protected, we're covered, we're loved, we have been embraced in such a way that A, we had not needed before, but B, in such a way that we had not experienced in that same way because we had not been in that situation before. So it was just a different level of embracing being in a place of love and being in a sanctuary and being honest about where we are, honest about what we wanted, and clear about what we needed to do moving forward. So the beautiful thing during that time was that we found out that we were pregnant with our second daughter. So we were still with toddler and pregnant with our second and establishing ourselves in this sanctuary of a home. Both places felt like a sanctuary, so it wasn't as if one was different. It was just a different time frame as far as how long we stayed in each place. We were able to continue to move forward as far as getting reestablished, and within 7 months, I remember when we finally settled into our next home, our youngest daughter was not born yet, so I was I was around 7 months. So many points to share in this story, but my main point that I definitely want to touch upon is, as you're building a relationship, as you're establishing yourself in community, it's so important to be reflective about how you show up in spaces, how you establish relationships, how you're cultivating those relationships through your words, how you're cultivating those relationships through the experiences that people have when they encounter you. And it's not to say that we were not worthy of or had the opportunity to be positioned to be received. It's just, I think about all the things that led up to the experience of transitioning from one home into another, all the many events that happened leading up to and in between, and I think about how important relationship was at that time, how important the words that were exchanged from one relationship to the next, how important that was at the time. And I also think about the words that were not spoken between my husband and I. We chose in this very natural way to just not play the blame game. We chose not to speak ill will towards or of one another. And this is not just to put on a face or a mask. This is literally, I have no reason, and I refuse to speak of myself, speak of my husband in that way. Now, I had thoughts about, man, what could I have done differently? Man, what could we have considered differently? What things should I have known up to that point that I did not yet know? I thought about those things, but I also recognize the importance of speaking words that lended themselves to the kind of relationship we wanted to continue to have and the kind of relationship that we wanted to see and make available to us for ourselves later. I thought about the example that we were setting for our toddler and what was important for her to see in how we exchange with one another. I also thought about, what is productive? Like, would it even be productive for me to speak in a way that did not best represent how A, I wanted to be spoken to, and B, what I saw for ourselves and our relationship later. I sifted through those things and my thoughts and decided it was just more advantageous and also just made more sense for how I like to move in relationships, to speak in a manner that was more representative of what I wanted to express and what I wanted to have received. So that's that. Thanks for listening.